Well, for our message today, I want to ask you a question. How would it change your life if you spent 40 years in a desert? How would it change your life if you spent 40 years in a desert and you didn't have the means to survive, but God provided for you in miraculous ways every single day? Well, how would it change your life if you spent 40 years in a desert, you didn't have the means to survive, God provided for you every single day, everything that you needed along the way, and His presence was among you in a pillar of smoke or a pillar of fire? How would your life be different if you were born on the first year of 40 years walking through the desert and you didn't know anything except for dependence on God, walking through the desert, His presence in your backyard every single day, and living life according to His laws? How might your life be different if that was the case for you? Well, today we're going to cover 3 books of the Bible that all happen over a 40-year period of time that the Israelites were wandering through the desert. This was their exact situation, and we're going to cover Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy today in order to explore some of the themes that came about during the desert wanderings. But before we do that, we need to do a little bit of a review because we are in week 4 of a series that's called Long Story Short, covering 1,400 years of Old Testament history in 10 weeks and trying to summarize it all in 40 words that we memorized together. If this is your first week at Christ Community Church, you're gonna think we're nuts. And we kind of are, because we're trying to learn these words with a little kind of momentum and a little bit of hand signals that go along with that. So if you're new, just kind of follow along. And if it's interesting to you, you can always catch up on our YouTube channel. All the stuff that we have is there, and you can listen to it on the road or watch it at home and catch up on everything. But for everybody else who's been here for the last 3 weeks, are you ready to do your first 12 hand signals? Okay, there's 12 people who are ready to do the 12 hand signals. We'll give you 2 chances today. Here we go. Creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. I am, the Lamb, the 10 and the tent. Okay, pretty good, yeah. Now some of you are going, I haven't been practicing all week. So we have another chance for you to try it again, but let's get rid of half of these babies. Okay, so the cheaters have less to cheat on. You guys ready to go? Here we go. Wait for me. Creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. I am, the Lamb, the 10 and the tent. Good job. Give yourselves a round of applause for getting through 2 of the 39 books of the Old Testament there. So we are going to be talking about the wandering time in the desert, and 3 books. Let me key you into the 3 books we'll be talking about. The first is the book of Leviticus, okay? The book of Leviticus. It's the 3rd book of the Bible, and it's all about commands that were given to the priests. Someone say priests. Okay, that's going to be our next word, so keep paying attention there, priests. Now, the book of Leviticus, you'll notice the first 4 letters of the book of Leviticus, they spell out one of the tribes of Israel, okay? It's the tribe of Levi, okay? Now, in the book, or in Leviticus, we find out that Moses is from the tribe of Levi, and Moses sets aside one of the 12 tribes. So you remember Israel had 12 kids with 12 names. One of his kids was Levi, and Moses was from the tribe of Levi, and so was his brother Aaron and a bunch of other people that he knew. So what Moses did is he set aside one tribe to be all about the priestly duties, all about the sacrifices, all about the music, all about the worship. These were like the church staff in the Old Testament. It was a small tribe, the tribe of Levi, but they had a big responsibility. And the book of Leviticus is all about the assignments to the tribe of Levi about how to be good priests. That's the entirety of the book of Leviticus. Now, do you know why Moses chose the tribe of Levi? Of all the tribes, chose the tribe of Levi? No. Because they have good genes. Right? Yeah. So, Now, you don't call them the Levites, you call them the Levites, okay? The Levites, and that's where Leviticus comes from. It is describing the word to the priests. Put your hand on your collars like this and say, priests. Okay, that's going to be our first word. Second book that we're tracking is the book of Numbers. And the key word that goes with Numbers is pilgrimage. Now, the book's current title is Numbers, but the original title of the book of Numbers wasn't Numbers. Originally, it was called Bamidbar, which is in the wilderness. And the reason is that it covers the 40 years that people were wandering in the wilderness. I actually like that name better than Numbers. It describes what happened in the book better than Numbers. Now, yes, there are lots of numbers in the book. In particular, there were 2 censuses that were taken in the book. One was at the beginning of the 40 years of wandering, and the other one was at the end of the 40 years of wandering. And at the beginning of the 40 years of wandering, they counted 603,000 people in all 12 of the tribes. And by the time you get to the end of 40 years, you have 601,000 people. And the importance of the 2 counts is that even though a whole generation of people died off in the desert, God replaced them with the same number of people, so that the same number of people who started in the wilderness ended in the wilderness, and the numbers just kind of work out. Besides those 2 censuses, the rest is stories of people wandering in the wilderness and what God did in their life while they were in the wilderness. Now, the last of the 3 books is Deuteronomy, and Deutero means second, and Nomi is laws, so Deuteronomy is the second law. At the end of their time that they had traveled through the wilderness, they got to the last days of their 40 days. Moses was just about to die, and all of the people who were with him weren't there when they got the law the first time. They weren't there in Mount Sinai. Why? Their parents were there, their grandparents were there, but they died off. Now, everybody under the age of 40 had not been on the point where they received the law. And so Moses goes up on another mountain, Mount Nebo at this point, and he gives the people the law for a second time with a few modifications that we'll talk about in a little bit. But another word for law is precepts, and it starts with a P, so we get pilgrimage and precepts. But wedged in there, we have to do 4 words a week, but we've only got 3 books. So we're wedging an extra word right in there called provision. And just so you know, provision has kind of a double meaning. One that goes along with Leviticus and one that goes through along with Numbers. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But these are our 4 words of the week. Priests, provision, pilgrimage, precepts. Let's read them out loud. You ready? Priests, provision, pilgrimage, precepts. All right. So here's what happens. We're going to go to Numbers 13, which has the story of how they got into this mess of wandering in the wilderness in the first place. In order to explain that, we need a map. So here they are at Mount Sinai where they get the 10 commandments. And God had promised them that he was going to give them a new land. You remember God promised Abraham 3 things, a people, a land, and a blessing. And they had the people, but they didn't have the land yet. And Moses is like, hey, let's leave Egypt and we'll go to the promised land. Well, they left Egypt and they went to Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. Now it's time to go to the promised land. So they go up to the desert of Paran. This is a staging ground for them to be able to send 12 spies into the promised land, which is up here. And in there, the 12 spies are going to check things out in the promised land. Now, when they get back, their job is, let's go ahead and click the next map here. So the 12 spies are supposed to go up and come back in the promised land. And their job is to check things out. They already have a promise from God that they're going to be able to take the land and live in the land. But Moses says, I need 12 people to do a recon mission. So I'm going to pick one from each of the 12 tribes who's smart and who's godly and who's a leader in those tribes. You 12 go and check out the land. And here's what I want to know. I want to know, is the land good or bad? Is it really a land flowing with milk and honey? What are the people like? What are their cities like? Are they fortified? What's the kind of deal? What are we going to be facing? He never tells them to give an analysis of whether or not they should go. But when they come back, that's the exact thing that they do. They say, oh, Moses, it is a land filled with milk and honey. It's a good land and a prosperous land. It's just like God described it. But this is where things break down. 10 of the spies say, but The people there are like giants. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak were there. We were like grasshoppers in their eyes. We can't take it over. But there were 2 of the 12 spies who said, we got to go take that place. And you know their names, right? Joshua and Caleb. Okay, Joshua and Caleb. These are the 2 like total studs of the book of Numbers. 3 people who are like the heroes of the time of Moses. One is Moses. The other 2 are Joshua and Caleb. I think Caleb's such a stud that I named my first son after him. And these guys are heroes, and they just do the right thing over and over again. Their argument is, if God promised us the land, he's going to give us the land. It doesn't matter how big or bad the enemies are. God promised it. God will do it. Didn't you see how he opened a can on Pharaoh? He's going to do the same thing to these people in the land of Canaan, so we should go. Problem is that the people went with the 10 rather than the 2, and they decided not to go in to the promised land. So God says, okay, there's a problem with this generation. They don't trust me enough, and so I need this generation to kind of move on and raise up a new generation that is filled with trust. And so the people of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years. And here's what it describes in the Bible. It says this in Numbers chapter 32. The Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until the whole generation of those who had done evil in his sight, later it describes anyone over 20 years old, evil in his sight was gone, until that generation was totally gone. Now, we've been able to procure an ancient map of Israel and get the exact path of the people on their wanderings. And here's what it looks like. This is the wandering path. Yeah. So 40 years wandering through the desert. And it's in this 40 years that Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are written. And that's why they're grouped together for us today as one set of books that goes together. So Leviticus is instruction to the priests. You guys remember the sign for priests? Like you got special clothes when you're a priest, right? So this is the priest. You'll have the 10, and then your hands are right here anyway, so you just go straight to the priests. All right. Did I say the 10? This should be the tent, not the 10, just in case anyone was confused, besides me. Okay, so the theme of the book of Leviticus is how to get clean, okay? How to get clean is the theme of the book of Leviticus. It's instructions to the priests on helping the people to be able to get back in a right relationship with God. In fact, I did a 12-week series on the book of Leviticus that was entitled Clean. And if any of you are interested in Leviticus, some of you are like, does anybody ever read that book? And the answer is yes, it's amazing, it's wonderful. If you read it without help, it can be some of the hardest sledding in the whole Bible, but do it as a part of this message series and it'll explain a whole ton of things that are super helpful. Well, the beginning of the book of Leviticus is about how to get clean from your sins, and there are sacrifices that are offered related to that. But you'll find out that sins are not the only thing that you need to get clean from. Sometimes you need to get clean from a skin disease, or you need to get clean from touching a dead body, or from a menstrual cycle, or from having a baby. It's things that are not evil, it's not bad, it's a part of the course of life. But when you come around death or blood or disease at any time, there are certain things that you have to do in order to be able to approach God. There's a sense in Leviticus that the holiness of God, his presence is so powerful that you just don't want to be unholy when you come before him. You want to be clean, and so you have to do certain things that will help you to be able to get clean. Usually it involves one of three things: a period of isolation, washings, or a sacrifice. Those are the three things. So you'll see these things repeated in Leviticus over and over again. Now, people who are modern day scientists and doctors say, you know what, that period of isolation and washing thing is actually really good for personal hygiene. And that's probably one of the key reasons why the Israelites didn't spread their communicable diseases as much, that they lived a long time, thrived as a culture. It's one of those things that God knew was happening in the backdrop, but he was allowing the people to experience it through his presence and through a desire to be able to get clean. So we see the book of Leviticus talking about that. We also see the book of Leviticus talk about God's provision for us, his provision for us. So somebody say provision. Now, provision will have a double meaning, and our hand signal actually goes with the second meaning, but track with me at this point and just kind of follow along. Our hand signal for provision is this, okay? It's provision, right? Provision. So you go from priests to provision, okay? Priests, provision. And God, in the book of Leviticus, created provision for people's sins through sacrifices that the priests did on their behalf. So there were animals that were sacrificed, sometimes birds, sometimes goats, sometimes rams, sometimes cattle. There were different sacrifices that were there for different reasons, and sometimes for different economic levels of the people making the sacrifice. And the idea was that blood would cover people's sins, okay? So you would have a sacrifice of atonement. And that word atonement literally means covering, okay? There was an atoning sacrifice that was there. And there was something that was very clear in the mindset of ancient Israelites, that the shedding of blood created cleansing for sins. Let's go ahead and look at Leviticus 17:11 that says that very thing. It says, "For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life." So God creates a pathway for people to have their sins covered so that they can come before a holy God. Now imagine yourself being an Israelite. You see these sacrifices happening every single day, and on some festival days, you'll see a lot of sacrifices that are being made. And on the Day of Atonement, it's a huge festival for everybody so that sacrifices can be made for the entire nation. And what does it do? It gets into your psyche. It gets into your brain, it gets into your mind that atoning sacrifices forgive sins. In the United States today, if you talk about atoning sacrifices, you're gonna get a lot of blank stares because people just are not familiar with a sacrificial system. But the sacrificial system was a setup in the Old Testament. God was saying, I want these people to understand this concept with great clarity and a lot of shock and awe and gore that goes along with it. Why? Because one day, I'm going to show up and bring the ultimate atoning sacrifice. Because the truth of the matter is, when you talk about all of the sins of humanity, billions of people added together, when you talk about all of the vile things that people do, it takes a really, really big sacrifice in order to pay for the sins of humanity. The only thing that makes sense is if the very Son of God would come to planet Earth and take on the sins of the world himself and give his blood as a covering for our sins. And that's exactly what happened in the person of Jesus, and Leviticus is setting up the rules so that people in that culture would see that over and over again, and when Jesus comes and dies on the cross, they would instantly say, that makes perfect sense to me. He's creating a culture that can receive Jesus. All right, so that's Leviticus. We got to move on here to Numbers. And Numbers is all about the wandering in the desert. It's the pilgrimage that the people take. And because they were kind of wandering in the desert, this is your pilgrimage, okay? Your pilgrimage. Some of you are going to want to be extreme and do it like the map did it. You know, that's okay. It's our wanderings, but the P word is pilgrimage. So everyone go pilgrimage. Pilgrimage, good. Okay, and we have priests, provision, pilgrimage. Okay, great. So the people of Israel, are wandering through the desert. And while they're in the desert, they are in the land between. What do I mean by this? Well, they had just spent 400 years in slavery in Egypt. And it was a bad period of time for them. We know that ultimately they're going to be moving into the promised land where they'll have hundreds of years with God under his rule in the promised land. But for a while, they're not in Egypt. They're not in the promised land. They're just in the land between. It's like they're in a holding pattern or a waiting cycle where everything's new and unfamiliar. My guess is that some of you can relate to that idea today of being in the land between. Maybe you're somebody who's just moved. Maybe you're new to Omaha. And Omaha for you feels unfamiliar. It's the land between. Maybe you're a young person who has left your family of origin, but you've not started your own family. Maybe you've left your old business, but you haven't gotten your new business taken off yet. Maybe you're waiting for a pregnancy test or the result of a lawsuit or a college entrance letter. You're just in between. In between. You're in the desert, you're feeling vulnerable, you're kind of wandering. I have good news for you. Sometimes God takes you to the desert on purpose. Sometimes God wants you in the desert because that's where he's going to do his deepest work. Sometimes God just pushes reset on our lives when we're in the midst of the desert, and he changes our priorities, and he changes our relationships, and he gives us a fresh start. Sometimes the old land that we're in, the land of slavery, is actually preventing us from getting close to God. And the new land is something that we're not ready for yet. And so God puts us in the land between. You know, sometimes when we're in a successful place and a busy place, we're just not paying attention to God. We're just not desperate for God. We're not on our knees, and it takes taking us to a new place, a land between, to show us just how much we need God. So what are you? Are you in the land between? If you are, good. Because God is pushing reset on your life. He's changing your motivations, changing your desires, and giving you a new mindset. This is what he did for the people of Israel in the desert as well. He was pushing reset on their lives. He was changing them from having a slave mentality to having a freedom mentality. He's moving them from fear to trust. He's moving them from an Egyptian worldview to a God-centered worldview. He's changing their minds. And sometimes to get this into people's minds, it takes 40 years in the desert. In fact, in this case, it took a whole generation with a slave mentality dying so that the new generation with the provision mentality, with the idea that God provided, could come. Now, when they were in the desert, don't get me wrong, it was not pretty. There was complaining, there was hunger, there was thirst. But in the midst of that, there was also amazing provision from the Lord. And that's one more use of the provision word. God provided for them food to eat and stuff to drink, and that's why this is the motion we have for provision. And so our word is provision. One more time, say provision. Yeah, so we'll have priests, provision, pilgrimage. Well, one time when they were hungry, actually for a long time when they were hungry, God provided this white flaky stuff that tasted like olive oil and floated down from heaven every day. They didn't have food in the desert. You think of feeding 600,000 people in the desert. Where are you going to find food for them? So God just floated it down from heaven, enough for them to eat, just enough for every day, and they had to recollect it every day. And the first day that they went out and saw this white flaky stuff on the ground, they named it manna. Manna. Do you know what the meaning of the word manna is? What is it? What is it? That's the meaning of the word. So they go outside and they see this, what is it? And they're hungry enough that they're like, oh, this is good. And so they start eating manna. And they get manna in the desert every single day, and it's a perfect nutritional balance and all that stuff that God would know how to make it. He sends it to them. So they have manna morning, noon, and night. They eat manna. Banana splits, manicotti, manaroni and cheese, manna cakes. One story, maybe my favorite to read in all of the Bible, comes from Numbers chapter 11. And it's about the people complaining because all they have to eat is manna. Can you guys indulge me while I read a long story from the book of Numbers? Okay, here's how this story goes. This is Numbers chapter 11. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this. What is it? Moses heard the people of every family wailing to the entrance of their tents, and the Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you, that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant? To the land that you promised on oath to their ancestors. Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, 'Give us meat to eat.' I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. And if this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me now. If I found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin." Then the Lord says to Moses, "Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, 'If only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt.' Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, or 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it. Because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wailed before him, saying, 'Why did we ever leave Egypt?'" So here's these people who, understandably, their food is getting old. It would be hard to eat the same thing day after day after day. But the whole cycle of the book of Numbers is the people complaining and grumbling to Moses, and God providing for them miraculously food and drink, and in this case, quail. Like hordes of quail would come flying into the middle of the desert. So many quail that you could pop them out of the air with a tennis racket if you wanted to. And they ate quail and quail and quail. And God provided for them manna and quail in the desert. The scene is a great summary of the wandering years because they learned to trust God for their daily provision. They had manna every day. Their clothes and their sandals miraculously never wore out. God accompanied them in a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. And they became very aware that God was at the center of everything. God gave them what they asked for in this case, and they regretted it. And then they realized they need to be grateful for the provision that they have. They realized sometimes what we ask for is not what we need. You guys ever been in that position? There's a great song that says, "Thank God for unanswered prayers." And I look back on my life and some of the prayers I prayed when I was young. I'm like, thank you so much, Lord, that you did not give that one to me. God's teaching them to align with his will and to trust in him every single day. Because when they go into the promised land, we'll tackle this next week in the book of Joshua, they are going to have to trust in God in big ways if they're going to take over the land. And so now they trust God in daily ways. And that's the pilgrimage. Okay, the last word that we have is precept. Someone say precept. Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy happens right here on the map. Let's get the wanderings back up there. It happens, you see where it ends right there? That's modern day Jordan, just before you cross the river Jordan to go into the promised land. That's a place called Mount Nebo where the people camped at the end of their time wandering through the desert. You see, Moses had disobeyed God, and so he wasn't allowed to go into the land. And that leaves Joshua and Caleb to be the ones who lead the people into the promised land. And it's at this place that Moses gives the law for a second time. A second time because this generation hadn't heard it the first time. And Moses wants the people to recommit themselves publicly to following the law right after hearing the law as it's read. And so he reads it out loud, top to bottom, but there's a major addition. There's an interesting shift in tone in Deuteronomy from what you read in the other 3 books where the law comes out. And it's summarized in the opening words of his sermon. His opening words that he gives them say this. These are super famous verses. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength." And Moses gives this word to all the Israelites, and he helps them to see that the primary basis of everything is loving God. It's where it all comes from. It's loving God with all your heart and soul and strength. And then he tells them, when I give you these commands, and then it goes for chapters on the commands, when I give you all these commands, teach them to your kids, put them on your doorposts. I want you guys to remember these things because loving God is so important. And that verse becomes what's known as the Shema of Israel, and it's the verse that they would repeat day in and day out to remember that the entirety of the law is based on the idea of love. And he goes back and he repeats all the laws that they've had before. It's interesting, sometimes people hear Jesus say that verse and they think that Jesus pulled it out of nowhere. Actually, Jesus pulled it out of Deuteronomy. And the one that was the second one that was just like it, he pulled out of Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. These are things that were already in the law of Israel that Jesus was following and prioritizing, and he prioritizes it for us as well as the first and second most important commandments. Jesus loved the book of Deuteronomy. I don't know if you know this, but the 3 times that he was tempted in the desert, Satan came and gave him a temptation, and Jesus quoted a scripture to him. All 3 of those scriptures were from Deuteronomy. Jesus had it in his mind. He had it memorized. It was a part of his life, and it was what helped him to be able to resist temptation. It's interesting. I think Jesus loved the law. He said he didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. And we see that Joshua was supposed to meditate on the law day and night. The good kings of Israel loved God's law, and they read it publicly, and they told the people about it. And David, King David, he wrote a psalm about the law and how much he loves it. It is the longest chapter in the entire Bible, Psalm 119. Longest chapter in the entire Bible. It's all about how much he loves God's word. It's honey on my lips. It's a lamp unto my feet. I love your law. I meditate on it day and night for line after line after line. He talks about how beautiful the law is. And in these 3 books, plus some of Exodus, you'll find that the law is laid out for the people of Israel. Now, most of us don't take a look at these 613 commandments, but I've been looking at them this week and saying, why would they find it so beautiful, so loving? You think of Leviticus and you don't think, oh, this is beautiful. I should meditate on it day and night. But then you read it and you go, it really is beautiful. Here's some of the laws that are in there. Love your neighbor as yourself. Leave the edges of your fields unharvested so the poor can glean there. Don't use false measures in business. Don't cheat people. Do not curse a deaf person or put a stumbling block before the blind. Pay workers on time. Justice should be impartial. Don't sell your daughter into prostitution. Rest, celebrate, and remember God in festivals. Provide safe havens for those who commit accidental manslaughter. Respect your elders. Love God with your heart and soul and strength. Teach your children well. Choose life and choose blessings. Don't oppress the foreigners who are among you. We could go on for a long time, but guys, God's law is beautiful. Now, some of these things, you hear me read them and you go, that kind of sounds like a no-brainer, like don't sell your daughter into prostitution. And it is kind of a no-brainer for us. But in the time of Moses, it wasn't a no-brainer. It was actually a common practice for people to sell their daughters into prostitution. And he says, you guys should be different than the nations that are around you. That's something that we don't do in our family. And these Judeo-Christian values have actually permeated Western culture in such a way that even today in the United States, thousands of years later, we find this to be abhorrent, but it's because it was established 3,400 years ago by Moses and his team. That's true of a lot of the commands that we see in Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. They're just beautiful. We take them for granted today, but it was not always that way. And this is why David says, your law is beautiful. I meditate on it day and night. So after reading this beautiful law, Moses says, okay, guys, we're going to make a commitment, and you got to choose. You can choose life and blessings. You can choose death and curses. It's up to you. Choose today which side are you going to be on. and the people together recommitted themselves to following this law when they head into the promised land in their next chapter. And eventually Moses dies. It says, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day, no one knows where his grave is. You know, Moses is the only person in the Bible that it says God buried them. He gave them a dignified, personal burial. Moses is the one who spoke to God face to face like one speaks with his friend. And it was his friend who went and buried him in a dignified place that would not one day become a shrine or a place for tourists to come and visit and people to make money. Just a personal place overlooking the promised land that God had promised to give to the people of Israel. You know, I want to take you guys through a little bit of a review on all of these pieces and make sure that we're on track with it. But also we want to give you a little bit of a time to reflect. So we're going to go ahead and do our review, and then we've got a video and a song to finish off our service, because I know the stuff that comes pretty rapid fire. And it's hard sometimes to reflect, hey, God, what are you doing in my life? So after we're done with saying our 16 words, we're going to have a video and the worship team come up and close our services in a way that slows us down and gives us a chance to hear from God. So I'll encourage you to do that. So the 4 P's that we have today are priests, provision, pilgrimage, precept. Oh, I didn't teach you precept. So precept is second law. Okay, so we've got the law that we're holding out here. Let's try that again. Priests, provision, pilgrimage, precept. Okay, one more time. Priests, provision, pilgrimage, precept. You guys ready to go all the way back to the beginning? I can feel it coming right now. Here we go, all the way back to the beginning. Creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. I am, the Lamb, the 10, and the tent. Priests, provision, pilgrimage, precept. Oh, give your guys a big hand, a big round of applause for yourselves. I'm grateful for how you guys have engaged in this. We didn't know when we started if people are going to think this is wacky and check out. Maybe you do, but I just want to tell you we're learning together really important stuff from the Bible. But we also want to listen to God for what he's doing in our heart. And for you, it might be that you're living in the land between and you just need to embrace the adventure with God. Maybe it's that God wants to press reset on your life in certain places and start again. Maybe God's preparing you for some upcoming challenges. Maybe you need to take a look into the law and consider it beautiful and apply it to your lives. I'm not sure what it is, but take a moment during this video to listen to God and hear what he's speaking to you today.
Thank you so much for engaging with us today. We'd love to hear how this service impacted your life. So please take a moment and email us at online@cccomaha.org and share your thoughts. Don't forget, visit our YouTube at youtube.com/cccomaha to subscribe to our channel, like it, and while you're there, click on the bell icon so you can get notifications about all the new content we post. God bless.